Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel where we talk all things finance and investing. In today's video, we're going to talk about thematic ETFs. They're getting more and more popular all the time. So much happening in that space, ETFs, thematic ETFs. I thought it'd be a good time to tackle this one, define it, and also talk a little bit about the pros and cons and whether or not you should think about adding thematic ETFs to your portfolio. So let's get into the video. So before we get into thematic ETFs, I thought it'd be worth defining what exactly an ETF is, in case anyone watching the video is not aware. But really an ETF just stands for exchange traded fund. And a fund, of course, is really just a pool of money that the fund manager will actually take that pool of money and go invest it in different companies. Historically, they've kind of been set up more for a passive investing in the S&P 500 companies, but more recently, the fund managers have come up with new and creative ways and investment mandates, so they'll take the money, invest in maybe specific asset class, specific sector, for example, or something like that. Now, the main difference is with an exchange-traded fund, it actually trades on an exchange. Before exchange-traded funds, you had to kind of subscribe to the fund from the fund manager. It would take, maybe 24 hours to actually get the fund allocated, and pricing would only be updated maybe once a day, the price of the fund, of course. But with an exchange-traded fund, as long as the stock market is open and the fund trades on the exchange itself, you'll have a price in real time, and with the click of a button, instead of buying just one company, you can actually buy the entire fund. So they're very cost effective, very easy, and very useful nowadays for your investment portfolio. So that's an exchange traded fund. So what's a thematic ETF? You may have heard of it recently, lots on the press nowadays with thematic ETFs. And what it really is the fund manager will take the pool of money and will invest in a particular investment theme. So it will invest in companies that make up part of this investment theme. And typically what that means is they're going to take the money, invest it in specific sectors or specific industries, in specific asset classes like stocks, for example. So I think one of the most obvious examples to me over the last year or so was a thematic ETF in the defense sector. Defense, of course, being, unfortunately, military, these sorts of things, how a country defends itself. And in the wake of the Russia-Ukraine war and some of the other things we see going on, defense spending by countries in Europe has gotten more and more popular. And expectation is that a lot of countries will be spending more on their defense. So therefore, a thematic ETF would be a way of getting invested in this theme, in this case, the defense sector. So how does it work? Well, you put your money into the fund, so to speak, and the fund manager itself will go out and they will buy companies that are in this particular theme. In my example, the defense sector. And they will do all of the hard work. They will look at the companies that are in the defense sector operating in that, and they try and pick the best companies operating within that theme. So the main benefit to you is you don't have to do the legwork itself. So maybe, for example, you read a newspaper article where it says, European economies are going to be spending a lot more on defense, and you think, wow, this could be a good investment for me. Where would you even start? A lot of us may not even know the names of companies that operate in the European defense sector. So there's a lot of work to be done in research on your part. But a thematic ETF takes all of that away for you. So what you would do is just look up an ETF that covers the defense sector. One of the more popular ones has got a ticker symbol NATO, N-A-T-O. A lot of ETFs and thematic ETFs have very catchy ticker symbol names like NATO. There's one that trades in London, trades in Europe, and trades in the US as well. And all that will happen here is the fund manager will take the pool of funds in the fund and he'll go and invest in companies that are in the defense sector, the best companies that they think it is. Therefore, if you buy into this ETF, you get an exposure to all of those different companies that make up the NATO or other thematic ETF, and all the companies that are operating within that sector. So it's a quick and easy way for you to get exposure to a sector like that just with one purchase through an exchange traded fund. So when it comes to the pros of a thematic ETF, well, the first one I already mentioned really, and that just comes down to it's just so simple and easy. One click of a button, you get exposure to this particular theme. Another benefit of this is the diversification. So rather than going and picking one or two or three companies that operate in a particular sector, you're actually getting exposure to sometimes 40, 50, or maybe even more companies that operate in that particular sector itself. So it allows you to diversify and reduces your risk of just picking maybe some of the worst performing companies in that sector itself. So diversification is another advantage to thematic ETFs. In addition to ease of use, diversification, a third pro to investing in a thematic ETF is their low cost. Now, they're not as low cost compared to, say, an S&P 500 tracker, which tends to be anywhere from 0.05 to 0.1%. So you'd be looking at, say, if it's 0.1%, that's around $10 for every $10,000 or pounds or euros invested. But when it comes to a thematic ETFs, the costs are a little bit higher, but they do tend to be only around 0.5%, 0.6%, 0.7%, 8%. So you're looking at around $50 or $60 per every $10,000, pounds, euros, whatever currency you operate in, invested. So they're still relatively good value. Remember, old school mutual funds, they tend to be charged around 1 to 2% per year. So it's about half the price really of those. So very easy way to get invested and a very low fee as well for thematic ETFs. Now, what are some of the cons of investing in a thematic ETF like NATO, for example? Well, one of the main risks, even though you're diversified, as I mentioned a moment ago, your exposure is still limited to this particular sector or theme. So if you invest some money in a defense ETF, for example, and defense does not perform as well as people expected and it underperforms the main market, then of course your returns will be lower. So there is a little bit more risk in terms of whether that sector will perform versus the overall market itself. It's an active strategy at the end of the day. You're not passively investing in a market the way you would do, say, in an S&P 500. You're actually trying to specify particular sectors that you think will outperform the market. But if it doesn't, then you're going to be worse off. So that's one thing to bear in mind. Another thing to bear in mind, there could be higher volatility in these particular sectors. It depends on what sector you go for. You've got AI, cybersecurity, crypto, defense, like I mentioned, healthcare, geographic sectors. There's so many to pick and choose from. Our industry loves to jump on board when something gets hot. It's just the way it is. But of course, there could be much more volatility. Volatility, just moving more extreme moves up and down in that particular sector. So make sure if you're going to invest in a particular sector, you're comfortable with the fact that your portfolio may have bigger moves. Not everyone's comfortable with that, or they think they are until the volatility hits and then they panic sell, which is a catastrophic mistake. So don't go near it unless you're willing to accept some higher volatility. Another downside to investing in a thematic ETF is it might require more time and investment from you, because rather than passively accepting the full stock market return, you're actually actively picking a theme that you think will outperform. This is going to require you to do a bit more research, a bit more decision making, and probably a lot more thought about buying and selling. And of course, trying to time the market is notoriously difficult. So this is a higher risk strategy, in my opinion, rather than just taking the total market return. So do I invest in thematic ETFs, or would I recommend them to somebody? Well, in all honesty, probably not. And here's why. After 20 years working in the markets, what I've seen time and time again is the hot theme. And when it becomes hot, everyone wants to invest in it at the same time. There are so many examples of this over my last 20 years. It's unbelievable. Of course, it started with .com, anything with .com in it. So many over the years. But another one, 2018, was cannabis, for example. It was super popular. Everyone thought that that was going to be the next big thing. And then you had things like cybersecurity, AI at the moment, extremely popular as well. And a lot of times what happens when so many people get behind a particular theme, fund managers, of course, rush to meet the demand by creating ETFs and other funds to capture this. And lo and behold, the markets disappoint. So I'm seeing a lot of people actually not fare nearly as well as they thought they would by investing in thematic ETFs. But if you believe a particular sector or industry is going to have a great long-term returns over the next 5 or 10 years, then it is something to consider. Just average in over maybe a year or two and let it go for the long term. there could still be some possibilities for long-term investing in a thematic ETF. But don't go jumping around trying to chase the hottest theme from year to year, because trust me, I've seen it so many times. You're probably just going to end up losing money. So that's my video. Thematic ETFs, very popular at the moment. Crypto, AI in particular, leading the way. Defense was quite popular in 2024. Might that continue in 2025? Trump now in power, wants more defense spending happening in the US and of course in Europe. So that's one that you can consider. But have a look at thematic ETFs. Your broker should provide them. If not, as always, quick search online and start doing your research and see if they're right for you. If you like my video, why not leave me a comment, share it with a friend, and if you haven't done so already, why not consider subscribing to my channel? It would really help me grow, produce more content like this, and as always, all the best in your savings and investment journey.